Hello everyone, welcome back again. I'm Raj. In the last video, I have talked about Firebase hosting to deploy your website on Firebase. Do check out the link in the description in case you missed this video. In this video, I'm going to talk about Firebase authentication and then how we can implement Firebase authentication with Google services. So you can authenticate your user with Google Auth. So in simple way, Firebase authentication is easy to implement within a Firebase and you can easily integrate with multiple platforms like if you are working on web, mobile or game development, even C++, you can use it. Firebase authentication work with n number of different third-party identity providers such as Facebook, Google, Twitter, GitHub, and so many. And you can support custom email and password authentications, phone number authentication, and so on. Now I'm going to talk about how we can implement Firebase authentication with Google. So first you need to create a project on Firebase, and then you have to go to the authentication and enable the Google Auth method. And then you need to register a web app in your Firebase project. And after that, you have to copy the Firebase SDK file and you have to implement in the code part. For implementing a Google Auth, we have a such methods. First method is sign in with pop-up. So this will method we use for if we want to authenticate a user. So there will be a pop-up for Google, and or you can use redirect like when we click on a button and there will be a redirect for Google Auth. And there is a third one method you can use auth on state change. So this will check whether the user is logged in or not. If it is logged in, we can show some say UI like user is logged in, or it is if the user is not logged in, we can show the UI for the login screen. And the fourth one is we can use a sign out method for logout purpose. So let's start with demo part. So this kind of application, this kind of web app we will create with Google Auth. So there is a button sign in with Google. So when I click on this button, so there will be a pop-up because I'm using pop-up methods. And then we need to authenticate. Yeah, so the authentication is done, and here this is it. This is my details, or I can log out from this thing, or again I can sign in if I want to do. Right now I have initialized Firebase hosting. Do check out the video previous one where I have explained about Firebase hosting. So this is a simple project I have initialized in Firebase hosting. We have index.html file, we have 404.html file and simple it. So we will work on index.html file. So I have by default write some HTML logic. This is my Firebase console. This is my Firebase dashboard, project dashboard, and I'll go to the authentication, click on get started, and enable the Google Auth. So I will enable the Google Auth. I can change the project ID, let's say TF Firebase demo, and then I'll assign an email ID. So that's it, and save. Google Auth is enabled. Now I wanted to create a project. So go to the project overview and click on the web part. So I will register a new web applications. So I'll type the name of my applications. So Firebase demo and then register. Here you will get the code and you need to copy that code and go to the VS Code editor and you need to paste it here, and that's it. So these are the by default JavaScript SDK for Firebase. So now I wanted to add Firebase SDK for authentication. So now I'll go to the documentation, or you can right now console and then go to the documentation. and go to the web documentation, getting started for web. And then there is a available libraries. And right now I will copy the Firebase SDK for the authentications. So this is the SDK for the Firebase authentication. So I will copy this authentication path and I will paste after the Firebase code libraries. And then this one is for the Firebase authentication, and that's it. This is very easy. So now I will create a two div. First div is for the login screen. So I'll add a ID login screen. This one is for the login screen and second one is for the dashboard, or we can say success. So we'll create ID for dashboard. Let's say after success. Okay, so here I will create a button for Google Auth. So I will add a button for Google Auth. So login with Google, and I will assign an ID for this button. The ID is login, and similarly for the dashboard I will add a button for the logout. So I will assign an ID of logout, and this is very easy. So we can check it on our browser. So we need to run this thing on local machine, so we can use Firebase serve. So I'll go to this URL. So this is about things we have implemented as of now. So we have created a two div section. First one is for the login, and in that section I have created a button for login with Google, and similarly for another div for the dashboard. So there is a button for logout. So now I will add event listener on these button. So we will add event listener with document dot get element by ID, and we will pass the ID. So the first one is ID is login, and then add event listener, and there is a event is click event, and we will call a functions. So we'll call Google login, and similarly for the logout button. So we'll add document dot get element by ID, and this one is for the logout dot add event listener. Will call user method name. So we will define two functions. So first function's name is Google login, so I will add console.log login button call. Similarly for we'll create a function for the logout user. Okay, so now I will check on a browser, and I will reload this page, and then I'll go to the console. This is my console window, and when I click on login button, so login button called logout button called successfully. So now I will add a logic for Google authentication. For implementing a Google Auth, first we need to create a provider. So provider is a Google authentication object. So we will create a provider. So let pro provider is equal to new, it's a JavaScript object, and I'm using Firebase inside Auth, and then we'll type Google Auth provider, Google Auth. So this is a Google Auth provider we have added, and now I will call the logic for authentication. So I will write firebase.auth. Auth is a predefined method within a Firebase, and then we'll use sign in with pop-up, not a small method, and then we'll pass a provider. So there is a provider, this is, and what it is a JavaScript promises, then we need to handle and I'm using ES6 arrow functions, so it will return a callback as a result, and then we will print the result console.log res. And similarly, if there is any issue, so we can handle in catch block. I will save, and then I'll go to the browser and reload this page. So now I will click on login button. There will be a pop-up. Now we will click on, we will authenticate the user, and yeah, user is successfully logged in, and we will get the details about the it's a JavaScript object, it is a callback, and we can check in the user section, and there is a details about the user like photo URL and the email ID. I think there is an email ID in, yeah, this is the email ID, display name, and email is verified or not. So we can print these details in the UI part after successful authentication. So you can check the authenticated user details in the authentication section and the user. So right now I have logged in with the Google Auth provider and the time and the user ID. So we can use that user ID in upcoming tutorial in database or storage services or maybe cloud functions. So now rest.user will give me the user object where we have a name and email ID and photo URL. Now what I will do, like I will create a div element for user data. So I'll define a user ID, user details, and I will create a new functions for printing a user details. So we'll create a function show user details, and we will pass user as an object, and then we'll write document dot get element by id, and we will pass the id, this one, user details here, and then we will add the data. So we will use inner HTML method. So we will create a multi-line string with the help of this symbol, and then we will print the image. So we'll add image src, and inside we can print with the help of dollar curly braces, and we have user, and inside user there is an object photo URL, and we'll add a style. Let's say the width is 20% or maybe 10%, and similarly we can print the name p hyphen and the name. So dollar symbol and user dot display name. And similarly, we can use the email ID. So we'll print email dollar symbol user dot email. So we can call these functions here. So res dot user, and yeah, I will check in the browser. I will reload first and again click on the login with Google. Yeah, so user is authenticated, and then there is a details. This is a profile URL and the name and email ID. Right now I haven't implemented the functionality for the logout button. So what I want to do, like if the user is successfully logged out, so the div element would be hidden. So we will implement this functionality. So I will use document.getElementID method. We will hide the things. So we'll write document.getElement by ID. I will get the ID of this element, not this one. Initially, we want this should be hidden. So we'll go to the dashboard and then style.display is equal to none. It will hidden. And similarly, when the user is successfully authenticated, so we want this should be block visible. And similarly for not for we want to hide login screen, so we will hide for the login screen, and this is it. So I will reload this page. So when we click on login with Google, so after some time it will authenticate and the login screen button is will be hidden and this is visible. Now I will show you how we can log out the user. So I'll go to the VS Code editor. So this is my VS Code editor. I will add the logic for the logout. So we'll use Firebase, then auth is a predefined method, and then there is a method sign out, and that's it. This is it, and this is a JavaScript of promises. So we can call a JavaScript promise, and it will return a callback functions. And then what we can do, we will use this logic, like if the user is successfully logged out, then we need to show the login screen and dashboard will be hidden. So yeah, that's it. And if there is any issue in the login, so we will use this one, and then we will handle in catch block, and we will print console.log e, and we will check again login success. And when I click on the logout button, yeah, so logout button is called and user is logged out successfully. So now I wanted to implement a functionality. Every time I wanted to now every time I have to click on this login button uh, for authenticating the user. I already logged in so many times, so I can add logic for if the user is successfully logged in. So directly we can show the dashboard. Otherwise, if this user is not logged in, we can show the login screen. So you can implement the functionality with on auth change by default, uh, the Firebase authentication functions. So first we will create a functions check auth state it will check the state of the user, whether the user is logged out or not. So first we will call Firebase. Inside we are using auth, and then there's a method of on state change, and it will return a JavaScript promises. So it will return a user as a callback, and we can print. So first we will check if the user is exists. So what we can do, we will call this logic, so user details, and we will pass the user. Otherwise the user is not logged in, so we will do nothing. So the same logic will copy and paste for the login. Like if the user is successfully logged in, like by default, so we will show the dashboard and hide the login screen. And I need to call check on state method, so we can call before the closing of the end script, and that's it. Now I will check. Now I will reload this page and click on the login with Google. First time my user is authenticated, and I get the details. I will reload the page, and it will automatically call on state method, and no need to click on again Google authentications button logic. So on auth state change working properly. So overall, I have talked about Google authentication and how we can implement Google authentication with pop-up method. And you can use it redirections. You can visit the Firebase documentation, and that is very easy. You can use it. So if you have any questions, you can comment your queries or questions below, and I would love to answer them. And this is our social media presence. You can reach us if you have any questions and queries. And thank you so much, and see you in the next video.